The night air was thick, heavy. It tasted of gasoline and yesterday's rain. Streetlights bled yellow onto the wet asphalt, a lonely stage for a play I never auditioned for. I remember the sharp, sudden grab from behind. A hand clamped over my mouth, smelling of leather and something else, something chemical. It wasn't a simple mugging. This was different. This was calculated. A cold precision in the grip, a strength that wasn't just brute force but practiced control. My struggles were useless, like a moth beating against a window pane, frantic and getting nowhere. He dragged me into the alley, the rough bricks scraped against my jacket, the sound swallowed by the city's hum. I fought, kicked, tried to bite the hand that held me silent. But he was a shadow with substance, a void with weight. He didn't say a word. The silence was more terrifying than any threat. It was the silence of a predator that knows its prey is already caught. A quick, sharp sting in my neck, a needle. The world began to swim, the yellow lights blurring into long, weeping streaks of color before fading completely. My last thought before the darkness took me was of the smell. It clung to him, a bizarre mixture of antiseptic and rot, like a hospital room where something had been left to decay for far too long. It was the scent of clean death, a sterile putrescence that burned in my nostrils and etched itself into my memory. It was the perfume of my kidnapper, a man who operated only in the suffocating cloak of night. I felt my body go limp, a puppet with its strings finally cut, falling into an abyss I couldn't see. The transition wasn't like sleep. There were no dreams, no sense of passing time. It was just a black, empty space, a sudden and total absence of everything. One moment I was fighting for my life on cold, damp pavement, and the next, nothing. The world had been switched off. The sounds of the city, the feeling of the rough brick, the desperate pounding of my own heart, all gone. It was a terrifying peace, a vacuum where I ceased to exist. I was just a consciousness adrift in a silent, endless ocean of black. Pain was the first thing to return, a dull, throbbing ache that started in my head and radiated through every limb. It was a raw, primal signal that I was, against all odds, still alive. My eyelids felt glued shut, heavy as lead shutters. I forced them open, a sliver at a time. The light was dim, a single bare bulb hanging from a high ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows. The air was cold and stale, carrying that same sickening smell from the alley, antiseptic and rot. I was in his world now. I tried to move my hands, my feet. They were bound. Thick, coarse rope bit into my wrists and ankles, securing me to something hard and cold, a metal table. My clothes were gone, replaced by a thin, rough-spun tunic that did nothing to stop the chill. Panic began to bubble up from my gut, hot and acidic. I twisted against the restraints, the rough rope chafing my skin raw. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic, metallic clinking of the chains holding the table steady. I was trapped. My eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. The room was a cellar. Stone walls wept with moisture and the floor was stained with dark, irregular patterns that my mind refused to identify. Tools lined a workbench against the far wall, not mechanics' tools. They were different. Polished metal instruments of varying shapes and sizes laid out with surgical precision. Chisels, scalpels, gouges, and strange curved blades I didn't recognize. They gleamed softly in the dim light, waiting. This wasn't a prison. It was a workshop. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound from the corner of the room just beyond my field of vision. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound of a blade being sharpened on a whetstone. It was slow, deliberate, and filled with a terrifying patience. The sound echoed in the stone chamber, each stroke a promise of what was to come. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat in the suffocating silence. He was here. He was in the room with me, and he was getting ready to work. The scraping stopped. I held my breath, listening to the crushing silence that followed. Footsteps echoed on the stone floor, slow, deliberate. He emerged from the shadows, tall and wiry, dressed in a dark, stained apron. Thick black goggles hid his eyes, reflecting the single bare bulb above. He circled the table, a predator. The silence stretched. "You are afraid," he said, his voice flat, clinical. Fear was just another tool for his art. I stared up at the black, soulless lenses of his goggles, my throat too tight to speak. He tilted his head, whispering, "Sight is a distraction. Sound is pure. It is the essence of being. I do not need to see you. I only need to hear you. Your scream is the soul laid bare. Let us begin the composition." My mind screamed no, but my throat was a desert. No sound came out, only a dry, useless croak. I thrashed against the ropes, the rough fibers digging into my flesh, scraping my wrists raw. The movement was frantic, useless, a trapped animal's last burst of energy. He watched, or rather listened to my struggle. His head remained tilted, the black goggles fixed on me, drinking in the sounds of my terror. The scraping of my skin, the frantic beat of my heart, the squeak of the ropes against the metal table. It was all music to him. "Ah, there," he whispered, a hint of excitement entering his gravelly voice. The first note, a percussion of desperation. He took another step, bringing him right beside the table. He lowered his head, the goggles just a foot from my face. I could see my own terrified reflection in the dark lenses, distorted and small. "Do not hold it in. Release it. Give it to me. Your silence is an empty canvas. It is your sound that will create the masterpiece." He wanted my voice. He needed my terror to be given form, to be made audible so he could begin his grotesque work. He wasn't alone in this room. My eyes, darting in panic, started to notice the other things in the shadows. Against the far wall, away from the workbench, were shapes. At first, I thought they were statues, strange and abstract sculptures standing in the dark. But as my vision pierced the gloom, the horror of it settled in my stomach like a block of ice. They weren't statues, they were bodies, or what was left of them, preserved, posed, and carved into nightmarish forms. Each one was a testament to his madness, a frozen monument of a final, agonizing scream. This was his gallery, a collection of his finished works. I was to be the newest addition. I saw one figure, its mouth open in a silent, endless shriek, its torso carved into a spiral. Another was contorted backward, its limbs elongated and twisted into impossible angles. He had sculpted them with pain, using their final moments of agony as his blueprint. He had listened to their screams and carved what he heard into their very flesh. And now he stood over me, scalpel in hand, ready to listen to my song and add me to his horrifying collection. The scalpel descended. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for pain. Instead, the cold blade traced my chest, a tremor in his hand. He waited for my fear to peak. The razor edge kissed my skin, then bit down. A gasp escaped. He wanted more. He needed the full orchestra. He didn't wait long. The scalpel came down on my arm, carving a slow, deliberate curve. The pain was grinding, drawn out, meant to be savored. My jaw ached, my teeth ground together, desperate to hold back the scream he craved. But when the blade scraped bone, I broke. My scream became his music. My vision started to swim. The single bulb above me blurred into a hazy starburst. The room tilted and swayed with each ragged breath. The pain was no longer a series of sharp, distinct events, but a single, roaring ocean of fire that I was drowning in. Blood was everywhere. It slicked the table beneath me, dripped onto the stone floor with a soft, steady patter. The coppery smell was thick in the air, a fog of my own life draining away. Through the haze of agony, my eyes drifted back to the silent, frozen figures in the corner. His gallery of screams. I saw them differently now. Not as abstract horrors, but as people. People who had been exactly where I was now. On this table, under this blade. They had screamed just as I was screaming. They had begged just as I was begging. The twisted spiral carved into one man's torso. I could almost hear the shriek that must have guided the killer's hand. The woman contorted backward, her spine arched at an impossible angle. I imagined the long, drawn-out wail of agony that had shaped her final form. They weren't just statues, they were echoes. Each one was a recording, etched in flesh and bone, of a final, terrible performance. This madman, this Carver, he believed he was preserving their essence, their truth. He was creating monuments to their suffering. He was a historian of horror, and his library was made of people. I wondered about them. Who were they? Did they have families? Did anyone even know they were missing? Or did they just vanish into the night, their final moments captured forever in this cold, damp cellar for an audience of one? The thought brought a new kind of terror, one that went beyond the physical pain. It was the fear of being forgotten, the fear of becoming another nameless, silent scream in this monster's collection. My own screams felt hollow now, just another contribution to his work. He was stealing not just my life, but my story, my identity, and replacing it with his own twisted interpretation. I was becoming one of them. The thought was a cold spike of dread that cut deeper than any of his scalpels. I had to find a way to fight back, not just for my life, but for my soul. He paused, setting down the bloody scalpel and picking up a new tool. My body was a canvas of pain, my voice nearly gone. But in the quiet I realized he relied on sound, on my fear. I forced a laugh, a note of defiance. He froze, thrown off by the discordant sound. The world was a red haze. My body screamed, but my mind retreated, fleeing the cellar, finding refuge in memories of sunlight, laughter, and love. Each memory was a shield, a flicker of hope in the darkness. He could scar my body, but not erase who I am. I endured, anchored by the caverns of memory. My mind raced for escape. He was a creature of ritual, relying on sound, his greatest strength and maybe his weakness. The thick goggles made him blind. Not a god of sound, just a blind man with sharp tools. If I controlled my sounds, I could control him. A flicker of hope in the dark. In the cellar's shadows, I saw his gallery of silent screams, victims frozen in agony. They weren't just echoes of suffering, but warnings. Their presence fueled my resolve that I would not become another statue. I would use my voice, turn it into a weapon. Their performance was over, mine was about to begin. He was cleaning a blade, the sound sharp in the suffocating quiet. I realized then he needed my fear, my screams. They were his fuel. So I gave him nothing. I became a void. I focused on silence, imagining a midnight lake, still, black, untouched. He finished with the blade, waiting for my reaction, but I gave him only silence, holding my breath, slowing my heart, refusing to feed his ritual. Confused, he reached out, lost in the absence of sound. In that moment, I knew silence was my weapon and he was powerless against it. The silence held a weapon he couldn't comprehend. The Carver, master of screams, was paralyzed by the void I created. He searched for any sound, my fear, his compass, finding only emptiness. "What is this?" he rasped, confusion and anger breaking his composure. He fumbled for a tool, desperate to force a sound from me. But my silence shattered his ritual, leaving him blind and lost. That was his mistake. He grabbed a heavy tool, abandoning art for brute force. "I will have my sound!" he snarled, swinging blindly. I let out a groan, projected left. He lunged at the phantom. Another gasp, thrown right. He followed, a puppet to my misdirection. I played him, testing my bonds with every feint. My blood slicked the ropes. I felt them loosen. One last sound sent to the far corner. He charged, striking only stone. Now. It had to be now. While he raged, I tore free, pain eclipsed by adrenaline. My hands bled, but the knots gave way. He heard, spun, but I was already moving, ankles next, then off the table. I stood, trembling but silent. He swept the table, finding only emptiness, his scream echoing in defeat. He smashed his sanctuary, unraveling in chaos. I slipped toward the stairs, each step a silent rebellion, toward the door, toward the night. I stumbled up the steps, agony in every movement. His destruction below masked my escape. The door gave way, cold night air hit me, clean and sharp. I leaned against the wall, the city's dawn, a distant comfort. Freedom felt hollow. The terror had changed shape, a stain I couldn't wash away. I was out, but I carried his darkness with me. The person I'd been was gone, left behind on that table. I wandered the waking city, a ghost among the living. He had tried to sculpt me with pain, but failed to hear the truth forged in silence. He was blind, lost in his ruined cellar, unable to recognize me except by my fear. But I was changed, colder, resolved. He had taught me to listen, to find weakness, to use silence as a weapon. I wouldn't go to the police, not yet. He wanted a masterpiece from my screams. Instead, he created something new behind my eyes. I would return and show him what true artistry and silence could do.